Hi everyone, and welcome to today's live Q&A session. I'm here today with Dan Calladine, Head of Media Futures at Carat and author of the Carat Top 10 Trends for 2017 report. I'm also here with Shenda Loughnane, Global Strategy Director at iProspect and author of iProspect Future Focus 2017 report. Links to these reports are available on our social media feeds. Check out our latest Facebook post, you'll be able to find them there. We're here to basically talk about the key themes and key trends that have come out of this year's trends reports across emerging media, technology and advertising. Send through your questions in the comments below and send through any comments and we'll do our best to answer them at the end of the session. So it seems pretty apt for me to ask this question. Dan, in terms of live video, why do you think live video has been so successful, and where do you see it playing in the brand's wider content mix?
I think what we're going to think with live video is it's amazing how long it took for live video to arrive in phones within apps. And in fact, it's interesting we're doing this today because today is 10 years to the day that Steve Jobs announced the iPhone at CES back in 2007. So I think in a way it's surprising it's taken so long for live video to be integrated into people's phones. And I think the success really comes from the idea that it's something people have always wanted to do. People have always been sharing their lives, but they've had to type to say that they're at somewhere or doing something rather than just opening their phone to show people. And there are some really interesting examples of things that we're seeing people do with it. There was the one that LucasA did where they turned a bus shelter into a workout station, and I was doing some research for a client last week and I found some really interesting uses around sports. So a horse racing track was going live before the races to show people the horses and really just bring people closer to the action. There's a cycling page on Facebook where they basically did a 3-hour live stream with multiple camera shots of a cycling race, in a velodrome, that would have just been impossible without this stuff happening, or certainly much harder to do. So I think it's really taken off because it's what people have wanted to do. But I also think there are probably lots and lots of bad examples of people doing it where the things didn't need to be live. And I always think with these things you shouldn't do them just because you could. You should actually have a proper reason to do it.
Yeah. And for those who are just joining us today, we're here live with Dan Calladine, Head of Media Futures at Carat, and Shenda Loughnane, Global Strategy Director at iProspect. We're discussing the 2017 trends to look out for this year in emerging media, technology and advertising. If you do have any questions, send them through. The links to the reports are also found on our social feeds and in our latest Facebook posts, so do check them out. Shenda, I have a question for you around content. Delivering personalised messages for a variety of targeted audiences means investing heavily in content. Are there any recommendations for cost-effective solutions for brands?
Yeah, I think absolutely. If you're going to invest in a personalisation strategy, then naturally that means you're going to be more segmented in your targeting and you're going to need lots more content and creative as a result. So I think next year we're going to see lots of marketers looking at ways that they can really try and reduce costs of producing content at scale. Some of the solutions that I think marketers will consider would be things like, for example, dynamic creative optimization, where you take in a feed and you create ads in real time from that feed on the fly, as it were, and optimize to the best performing. And that's something that we see retailers, for example, doing quite a lot. They'll use a product feed to target very specific products and very specific targeted audiences. So that's certainly one solution that we're likely to see, certainly big retailers and those that have very large volumes of inventory using much more. Another solution would be, for example, creative management platform, and using some form of creative management platform to automate creative and therefore reduce the amount of time that it takes to produce the volumes and the different types of formats. So those are certainly two, I think, key solutions that we'll see advertisers using more of. Both have existed, I think, in some form in the past, but unfortunately templates in the past have been a bit clunky and a little bit ugly, and we've seen quite a lot of good developments in the last couple of years to make them look much better for brands to use. I do think another thing, though, that brands should think about when they think about reducing the cost of creative is to think about how they structure content. So rather than thinking of content specific for social and specific for website and specific for advertising, to start thinking about content in a much more holistic manner, and with that comes efficiencies as well. Great.
And Dan, you mentioned in your report the importance of brand ambassadors and how that ties into branded content. Do you think that will feature much more significantly going forward?
Yes, I think we're in a really interesting stage of the evolution of content at the moment. So I think, essentially anyone can produce live video, anyone can produce video, and now anybody can put it almost anywhere. Red Bull has an app which you can easily connect to your TV through Chromecast or through other apps, and so suddenly, while where Red Bull created an app, it now created a TV station which is global. And there's other examples of this, like a kids app called Toca Boca, which is now a global kids TV channel. So what that means is that any brand could, at less cost than previously, create content that can be seen by people globally. And what this is going to mean is that more and more content is going to need to be produced to satisfy the people who want to see it. And while a lot of people at the moment have used brand ambassadors for sharing the content, so for example, YouTube stars to get them to demonstrate products, what you could now do is you could get these people to be the brand ambassadors, to be presenting shows for brands, and also where people have brand ambassadors that they use within TV advertising, for example. Quite a lot of FMCGs do this. Quite a lot of people have a relatively well-known celebrity as a spokesman. Their role could be expanded to effectively take on presenting TV shows or hosting segments on a very regular basis. And I think the possibilities for this sort of stuff are endless at the moment, but we just need to work out what sort of things are most likely to work most effectively.
Great. Thank you for that. And to those who are joining us today, we're here with Dan Calladine, Head of Media Futures at Carat, and Shenda Loughnane, the Global Strategy Director at iProspect. We're discussing the 2017 Trends Reports. If you do have any questions, do send them through. The links to the reports can be found across our social channels and in our latest Facebook post. Moving on to VR and AR, which was obviously highly successful, or at least highly featured at CES this year. Dan, Pokemon Go obviously exploded onto the scene last year and really took AR into the mainstream, and it's since sort of tailed off a bit. There's not really been any other AR apps that have stolen the limelight in the same way. Are there any interesting AR projects on the horizon, and do you think it will become genuinely mainstream this year?
I think there's some fantastic and fascinating things that people are doing around AR. When I was researching the trends, I was looking into the more innovative things that people are doing, and one of the ones I found was that Caterpillar, who make diggers for building roads and things, they've developed a suite of AR tools where if you have if you're doing maintenance on the ground with one of the diggers or one of the machines that they have, there's an app that you can load, and it will just tell you exactly how to do the maintenance. So it will say, okay, the bonnet's shut, open the bonnet, and then take this bit out and put this bit in here. And things. So you can see, for any set of instructions you've got, you could actually see AR working in that sort of way. For any sort of unboxing, for any putting things together, there was a kid's toy we found on Kickstarter which used AR as a way of showing people how to join the toy together to do different things. It was an electronics kit, and so it would recognise the different parts you had, and it would just show you how to join them together and what you would get when you joined them together. So I think there's an awful lot of scope with AR for showing people how to do things, as well as doing location-based things, which obviously Pokemon Go was taking that part of. So I think it'd be really interesting if someone like someone who makes white goods, instead of giving you an instruction book, gave you an app you could download. You could just then see exactly how to do things. And there's also things like cookery that could be fantastic within that as well. So I think there's a huge number of possible things happening, but I'm not quite sure when they'll actually become mainstream. It might be a couple of years or so for this stuff to become more mainstream. But I think people will get the hang of it really easily, and I think that would be the most important thing for whether people would use it or not.
And Shenda, what are your thoughts around VR? Do you see VR becoming more mainstream this year in the context of brand advertising, for example? Where do you see its role?
I think it's interesting, we were just talking before we came on air, did you say on air?
Yeah.
Before we came on air today about CES and about VR and how it didn't seem to have been quite a focus that perhaps people thought it would be. My own personal feeling is that you just look a bit dumb in those kind of things that you got to wear, and I think until that somehow feels more normal, I think we're a little bit away from it becoming mainstream.
I'd love to know, and they won't actually release the numbers, but I'd love to know how many PlayStation VRs were sold over Christmas and how many people were using them, because I know that within agencies we can become quite jaded, because I think we've all been playing with Oculus and things for a couple of years or so, and I was quite surprised, I think in about October or November last year, when that was actually the official Oculus release date in the UK, because you just thought, hasn't everybody been using it for ages? So I think, or cardboard, yeah. So I'm sure a lot of the people using PlayStation VR, it would have been their first experience with VR, and I'm sure an awful lot of those would have been completely blown away by it. And before Christmas, I was with some clients showing off some examples of virtual reality apps, just with Google Cardboard and their own phones. And one of the clients got so immersed in what he was doing, he walked into a wall as he was walking around the conference room that we were doing it in. So I do think the first time you use VR, it's amazing, and I do think that we can become jaded as an industry, but I also think that it's as if there were 500,000 TVs in the UK or something. You would have to look at the medium in that sort of context. So I think, again, give it a couple of years, it could be really, really interesting. But more and more, it's getting into people's hands, and people are finding interesting things they can do with it, and also the content is getting better and better. We're talking to a VR studio which is doing some projects for a number of brands, and that stuff should be really interesting as well.
Great. For those of you who have joined us, we're here today with Dan Calladine from Carat and Shenda Loughnane from iProspect, and we're talking about the key trends to look out for this year in media, tech and advertising. If you do have any questions, send them through in the comments below. The links to the reports can be found on our social posts and in our latest Facebook post. Moving on then to chatbots and AI. Dan, AI solutions are really helping brands optimize their communications. Is there one specific sector where AI has been particularly utilised to deliver responsive communications?
With AI, I think we're in relatively early stages of things like optimization. So I think things like, you could argue that things like programmatic advertising use a lot of AI because they're making a lot of decisions very quickly and they're learning from past performance as an automated optimization tool. I think the sort of the far edges of AI are really interesting, where Google is using things like translation. There's an AI company that Google bought called DeepMind, which is the company that won Go against the Go Grandmaster last year, and they're using it within Google for all sorts of internal things like optimizing power bills or power usage and things. And you just imagine that if Google are doing that, then they're obviously asking it to optimize, to look at optimizing advertising delivery and those sorts of things as well. So I think that's really interesting. I do think AI can be a bit of a buzz phrase within the industry, almost like the new version of big data that everybody was talking about 2 years ago. And quite often when people talk about AI, I think what they really mean is just advanced analytics. But I think there's an awful lot of interesting things about to happen. I think, Shenda, you had some examples as well.
Yeah, I think when we talked about personalization earlier, I think that's one of the areas that AI can really help enhance. So we saw in 2016 some interesting experiments using IBM's Watson to try and use artificial intelligence to produce advertising that is much more personalized. So, for example, Chevrolet used Watson to go through people's social feed to understand how positive they were, and they ran a rewards campaign on the basis of general positivity. So using Watson to analyze language to try and understand positivity. So, and there's been many other examples, I think, of brands using Watson in 2016 in that way. So I think for me it's about how we can use it to really deliver that sort of personalisation at scale that we talk about, because at the moment we're not really there yet. So that's, I think, quite an interesting area for AI.
Interesting. Just on that point of identity and personalisation, given the wide range of channels and consumer touchpoints, brands are really striving towards understanding that unique customer view and really just trying to understand the customer journey. How is iProspect approaching that challenge?
So it's interesting you asked that question. We did a survey of our clients just before Christmas. We surveyed 150 global clients, and within those 150 clients we asked them what are the key challenges that they face in the digital economy, and that was the number one challenge, is how do we connect everything to get that single view of the consumer. And that's really about understanding what are the data points that allow you to understand the consumer, how do you connect those data points, and how do you use technology effectively. And one of the things we're doing at iProspect is we've launched a solution called Consult, and Consult is a group of people who are experienced in data and technology and marketing, and they're working with clients to help them to get that single view of the consumer. So for example, we're working with Eurostar at the moment, and we've been connecting data points from campaigns to sales data to onboard entertainment on Eurostar to try and build that picture of audiences that we can then activate in a really segmented manner. And that involves investing in sourcing and implementing and activating a data management platform, and then producing the advertising off that. So I think that's one of the key areas where we're trying to help clients get that single consumer view.
Great. So we've got a question through from the feed. Where do you see SEO in 10 years? Who would like to approach that question?
I can have a go at providing some sort of principles. I think the great thing about SEO was a way of designing your website or your assets in a way that made it easy for Google and other search engines, but mostly Google, to access the data and to read it and to decide how relevant you were for certain sorts of queries that was being asked. And I think the new version of that is not only Google, but also things like Alexa, also things like Siri, also things like Chatbots. So I think there's going to be something around SEO to really try to order information in such a way that as many different sorts of forms of technology are going to be able to access the data and understand the data as easily as possible. And then it's up for those things to decide, to decide how to use the data. And inevitably, as with SEO, there are going to be people trying to game the system and people trying to do what they can to get their results to the top as much as possible. Shenda, I think you've got some more.
Yeah, well, first of all, I think I would say it's quite hard to say what the future of SEO looks like in 10 years' time. Who knows 10 years' time? But if we look at the next couple of years, I think we've got to start thinking of SEO beyond the traditional way that we think of it. So we think of SEO in terms of website optimization primarily. And I think increasingly we need to think about things like app optimization. We've got to think, as Dan said, about voice in particular and how we can optimize for natural language, for example. So those are key areas that I think are going to be really important for us to think about in the very near future in terms of SEO and how we're optimizing.
Perfect. We've got another question through. Are you forcing analytics as a separate wing aside from media? Is it its own separate entity?
I think analytics has always been able to inform media. I remember 15 years ago doing reports of people looking at the analytics and then using that to decide what media to buy next time round or what to optimize on. So I think analytics has always informed media, but I think it is it's a relatively different area, quite often different skills, different sorts of people are good at analytics to be prepared to be good at media.
I would say it comes back to, if you think about our proposition, it's a bit about being specialist and integrated, and exactly that is that analytics is a very specialist skill, but it is absolutely a critical skill that informs our media. And so although we want people who are very skilled in analytics increasingly in our business, those people are really helping to inform the media work we're doing. So they're very closely connected, media and analytics. They're in fact, I think increasingly becoming one and the same. But it's about having people who are very skilled in analytics working with other disciplines within our business together in an integrated way.
I agree. In terms of the connected home and the Internet of Things, the connected home was featuring enormously at CES, and yet wearables have sort of plateaued a little in terms of smartwatches. What are your thoughts in terms of that change or that progress in the Internet of Things?
I think it's really interesting, actually. I mean, the reports I've heard that came from CES, I didn't manage to go to CES myself, but the reports I've heard is that Amazon was sort of everywhere in the background within other people's products, with Alexa, and because Alexa is the essential operating system to the Amazon Echo, but also arguably to all of Amazon itself, or that's the future for Amazon. And I think it's really interesting that actually Alexa is the product that Apple should have made when they were making the Apple Watch. I think Apple is just very, very tied to the idea of screens and touch, and Amazon saw that voice was also going to be really, really important, even though obviously Apple's had Siri for longer than Amazon's had Alexa. So I think in a way, I wouldn't write off watches and other sorts of wearables. I think there is something going to happen. It may just be a bit too soon at the moment. I think there needs to be greater integration. Things need to be more miniaturized. Battery lives need to be longer. But it does seem at the moment that having a smartwatch is relatively niche. I saw some stat last week that said that 11% of American broadband households has a smartwatch, and to me that just seems incredibly high. And also, anecdotally, within people who have smartwatches, anecdotally the evidence is that people might have them but they don't wear them every day, that they might take them out if they're going to a conference or something, that they might have a use for them, but otherwise they just rather not wear a watch, or wear a watch that looks nice or easy to use or something. But I think the category with the whole wearable thing, and also in-home media, so in-home devices, will continue to grow. I think we're just not quite at the iPhone moment yet within things like smartwatches.
Interesting. Shenda, this might be a good question for you. We've had a question through around branding versus performance. Can they work together?
I think that's a really important point, actually. It's one of the things we talk about in Future Focus when we talk about connected commerce, because essentially the point of transaction and the point of engagement and transaction are coming ever closer together. And so one of the things we'd say is that we've got to stop thinking brand and performance, and actually everything that we do has to be able to deliver on brand values, should be able to deliver on performance, and should be connected to commerce. And if you think about the formats that are available to us today, increasingly those formats are also allowing us to connect that brand and performance experience. So for example, last year Pinterest launched buyable pins. So formerly you would have thought of Pinterest maybe as more of a brand play, but now increasingly it's connected to commerce. Google as well launched TrueView Video, shoppable TrueView Video. So again, connecting traditionally seen video as brand and commerce together. So I think it's beholden upon us to really start thinking of the two as two sides of the same thing, rather than brand and performance.
And on that note, we've seen the incredible success of WeChat in China, with businesses using it to connect with customers in a more transactional way. Are there any good examples of brands that have successfully replicated that conversational commerce in the Western world?
Yeah, I think conversational, if we talk about trends, conversational commerce is probably going to be the biggest thing that we see in the next couple of years, and the biggest thing that brands need to be thinking about. So brands that are doing it well, I mean, of course, Uber were one of the first to get involved in conversational commerce and really benefit from inserting themselves very nicely in a conversation. And it's quite an interesting area, conversational commerce. Brands need to really try and rethink the customer experience. It's quite different within conversation versus within website or traditional app. One we feature in Future Focus is Spring, a fashion brand in New York that have done some very nice work around allowing you to order and helping you to choose goods within a conversational environment. So there's only a few good examples, I think, at the moment, but we'll see more, I think, in 2017.
Interesting.
I think chatbots are a really interesting area, and I think chatbots is another area where we're comparatively early on, and there aren't that many good chatbots that I've seen. And I agree. I've seen some of what Shenda was talking about, and I agree they're good. And another one I'd like to highlight to people is Sky Sports have one now called JeffBot, named after Jeff Stelling, the Sky Sports presenter. I think if you search for Sky Sports Jeff on Facebook Messenger, you should find it, and that's really useful because you can ask it information about, who's in such and such a team for such and such a match. You can set up your favourite team that will send you regular updates about that, and then also send you scores. And I think it's only a short stretch from that to be able to say, would you like a ticket to next week's game, or something. And then with that, it would just be a very natural place to insert something like that. I mean, today, for the first time, I had an email from Amazon asking me if I wanted to buy cinema tickets, which I didn't know they did. But again, it's the sort of thing where why wouldn't I buy cinema tickets from an email from Amazon? Why wouldn't I buy, football tickets for a football match or a football shirt from a chatbot if it's a brand that I trust, like Sky Sports or like Amazon?
I think the experience is important as well, actually. I tried to use a chatbot for a travel portal just before Christmas, and it said, thanks very much, we'll be back to you in 24 hours. Seems a bit, for a chatbot to tell you it's going to take a day.
I tried to use a chatbot. I was just trying to break it, to be honest, trying to see how it wouldn't work. And it was a travel chatbot that's been written about in quite glowing terms in an article I'd seen. And I asked it, where would you recommend for a short break? No, for a city break. And it didn't understand the term city break. And you think, well, it doesn't understand city break, it's not going to understand stag weekend, it's not going to understand all sorts of other phrases that people actually use in conversation that they would use to their friends. And that's the point of chatbots, it's meant to be as if you're talking to a friend. So not misunderstanding a very easy phrase and not saying, we'll get back to you in 24 hours.
24 hours.
Because if your friends did that, you'd be like...
But do you think it's important to differentiate between, knowing that you're speaking to a robot versus speaking to a human being?
Oh, I think so, yeah. So I think it needs to be, and I mean, presumably people use Sky Sports, and I don't think they're really speaking to Jeff Stelling. But I think you also need to have a point within the script in the chatbot for it to say, I'm going to refer you to a person, I'm going to refer you to one of my human colleagues or something like that, then somebody else to step in. But it should be able to take a lot of the strain out of things like call centres where everybody rings up to ask exactly the same question. So today, for people who know London, today is a tube strike day, and everybody tweeting at Northern Line, at Central Line, whatever, is asking the same questions. And so that's a classic case where a chatbot could be really useful.
We've got one last question, and we've already sort of touched on this, but there's a huge amount of buzz around AR, VR. Do you think 2017 will be the year where we start seeing it take considerable market and advertising share from traditional video forms?
No, not 2017, not yet. But I think it will grow, so it might grow tenfold because it's very, very small at the moment. And Snapchat is, Snapchat was one of the success stories of last year, but Snapchat's revenues are tiny compared to Google and Facebook and Twitter. But still, it's growing really, really quickly. So I think this year, no, but there'll be some really interesting things done, and then that will encourage more people to do it. And again, give it a couple of years, and then things might start to get there.
So we're going to wrap up with. If you're able to talk about the top 3 trends, really, to look out for this year, and perhaps some key takeaways from CES.
For me, I would say it's about AI. I would say it's about social commerce. I think certainly social conversational commerce and messaging, and I would say it's about chatbots.
So I would say
connected homes.
Connected homes as well, yeah. I would say 3 things. The first thing I think is there's a big piece going along around the evolution of content, which includes live video, includes VR and AR. It includes things like sports rights. Facebook streamed an NBA game for the first time ever last night live, only to India, I think, because of sort of rights issues. But I think there's an awful lot happening around how content is evolving. And the second one I would say is there's an awful lot happening around the interplay between online and offline, digital and physical, real and virtual. And you see that within things like, you know, what's happening around location and proximity, what's happening around people's identity. So people trying to have a single identity for the offline client and the online client. You know, you're trying to work out if the customer is the same person. And then the final one, and when I write my trends, it becomes harder each year because I can never use what I used last year. And I think it wasn't last year, I think it was a couple of years ago.
And it might still be a trend.
Yeah, it might still be a trend. And you either have to rename it or sort of fiddle it a bit. But one I put in a couple of years ago, voice, is finally really coming into its own. And I think things like Amazon Echo are going to be really interesting this year. More and more people are using voice to talk to their, you know, to get their phones to do things. You know, it's not things people simply do in meetings to show that it can be done. So I think there's a huge amount going on around voice, and that always brings in things like translation and things like accents and dialects and words that sound like each other, almost like two Ronnies, four candles sketch. So I think there's a huge amount of things, but those will be my key three themes for the year.
Perfect. Well, thank you both so much for joining us today. It's been really, really insightful. Thank you also to everyone who tuned in and for your questions and comments. We'll host another live Q&A later this month with Posterscope, so do tune in for that too. But for the meantime, thank you very much for joining and have a great day.
Thank you.